Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast.
We've scheduled the race so that although it's a little bit more logistically difficult on the front end, but for both races to finish at approximately the same time, right, through the same part of the course, and really culminating this day of hopefully introductions to Pittsburgh with our regional racers and introductions to the sport with our more local racers. With everyone crossing that finish line, celebrating together is obviously a moment that I'm sure every race director is really excited for.
Well, for me, the action is the juice. I'm in.
I need you, brother. Please, Sensei, please.
Courage, Bob. Courage.
That's it. Courage. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Hey, thank you, Sensei. Thank you, Sensei. Thank you.
Say the word, Chef.
Let it rip.
The Dark Zone is so excited for the return of one of the original Adventure Addicts races. That's right, folks. Break the Habit is back in 2026 and heading to the mountains of beautiful West Virginia. On May 30th and 31st, teams will take on to 24 to 30 hours of trekking, pack rafting, mountain biking, and elite navigation in Pocahontas County, one of the most rugged and adventurous regions in the whole state. We're talking about the heart of the Monongahela National Forest, 5 state parks, 2 state forests, 400 miles of trails, legendary mountain biking, and free-flowing rivers. It's a true playground for adventure racing. Like all Adventure Addicts events, Break the Habit is designed to let teams create their own adventure. You'll choose routes that match your ability, but make no mistake, smart strategy and top-notch navigation will determine who conquers the full course. And yes, it is both a USARA and AR World Championship qualifier. If you're looking for big terrain, real navigation, and that classic Adventure Addict spirit, Break the Habit should be on your calendar. You can find the link in the show notes or at adventureaddictsracing.com. That's right, folks. One word, adventureaddictsracing.com. Good luck, and we'll see you in West Virginia. Adventure racing creates moments that can't be staged, bought, or stumbled into. They have to be earned. And photographer Nick Winia is there to capture them. A documentary filmmaker whose work has appeared in Vice, The Wall Street Journal, and publications around the world, Nick has been capturing adventure racing since 2022, shooting the Endless Mountains Adventure Race, Broad Run off-road events, and New York Adventure Racing Association events. He doesn't just take photographs. He tells the story of your race. If you're a race director who wants images that do justice to your race and your athletes, check out his adventure race gallery at storycityfilms.com. One word, storycityfilms.com. Look under projects, click on adventure racing for a full gallery. Nick Winia, bringing the storyteller's eye to the world's greatest sport. Welcome to the Dark Zone, episode 154. This is your host, Brian Gatens. So right now, everybody in America is watching The Pitt. It's a TV show. It's set in, obviously, Pittsburgh. It's medical drama. It's amazing. Pittsburgh is having a moment, and we wanted to coincide the final episode of this season of The Pitt with another Pittsburgh story that is worth your attention. And this is one that you could actually take part in. Kevin Tucker is an expedition adventure racer, a veteran of Untamed New England and Endless Mountains. He's also a civil rights attorney, and more importantly, he's a first-time race director. He and his team are doing something that is almost never done in this sport. He's telling you what to pay for their race. That's right, folks. No minimum, no gatekeeping. Just show up and race. See Pittsburgh and find out what adventure racing actually is. So welcome to Kevin Tucker, who joins the Dark Zone today to talk about 3ROC's Pay What You Want 6 and 12-hour race being held on May 16th in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. All right, folks, welcome to the Dark Zone. We're delighted that you're here. Anybody who's a listener of the Dark Zone knows that we try to throw a wide net around the world of adventure racing, right? We talk to people who race at the international world championship level, and we talk to folks who put on local races and volunteers and folks who are deeply connected to adventure racing. But one through line in all of our work is that we know and understand the amount of effort that goes into putting a race on. And so we always have a preferential option for people who are race directors, racers who want to make that leap to the next level and put something on for the community, because we only grow through that, through race directors and volunteers and people putting races on. And so today we are delighted to welcome Kevin Tucker, who is the race director for the Pay What You Want 6 and 12-hour race being held May 16th, 2026 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's affiliated with 3ROC Adventure Racing. And so Kevin is on the show today to walk us through his race and his experience and all that fun stuff. So Kevin, welcome to the Dark Zone. Delighted to have you here. Glad to finally get you on the show. We can talk about your pretty cool race. Tell us all about the Pay What You Want Adventure Race.
Yeah, Brian, thank you so much for having me. This race is just our attempt and really a natural progression of the adventure race community that we've been trying to build here in Western Pennsylvania. And we're not the first ones to attempt to do it. Adventure racing goes back a number of years through more local races, through grassroots racing organization. Frank and Beth Ann Eith might be names that, adventure races over the years would recognize, or Doug Kreitzer's, based here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as well, and has been hosting adventure races for a number of years, whether that was the Lionheart adventure races here in Western Pennsylvania or some international races south of the border as well. So, really relying upon the momentum and the inspiration that those folks played. We're trying to, keep that going. And we've been doing that through a local family-run gear shop, 3 Rivers Outdoor Company, over the last number of years, really trying to convert Western Pennsylvania's trail running community, give them a compass and say, let's go get lost together. And this race is just the natural progression to try and get that community to sign up for their first race.
Literally, it's in the title. It's Pay What You Want. And so that's a unique approach, right? Race directors, they all make choices regarding pricing, what they want to offer, how they want to do things. And very often race directors will put races at a low margin. For example, I was the co-race director for New York Adventure Racing's Fool's Row Game. We charged $35 for 10 hours of racing, actually 11 hours. At the last minute, we decided to add an hour on. It was like 30 cents a checkpoint, like 118 checkpoints, right? And so we focus on having it be very economical for the racer to get maps in hands. We had a low price, but we didn't put that in our name. How is that acted as an engine to get people to be interested in the race?
Yeah, I mean, I think by putting it in the name, it's been really easy to explain, to whether it's community partners, to potential racers who don't have to go looking for additional details. I think that we've seen over the last number of years that the Pay What You Want business model is growing momentum as a means of lowering barriers to resources that folks rely upon for life. And we wanted to borrow that public policy as a means of trying to introduce racers to this, this source of entertainment and a lifestyle.
And so clearly addressing that early acts as a reason to get people to kind of perk their ears up.
Yeah.
You're giving me something at my own cost. Like, say more about that.
Yeah. I mean, we've been getting emails from folks who are like, is this really a free event? And we're able to respond back and say, yes, through both the volunteers hosting the event and the logistics and our community partners who are supporting us as well, but also the fellow racers that you'll see at the start line who are voluntarily paid more than what we've disclosed to be our projected cost per racer. And it's just been really fascinating to see, just from a statistical standpoint. We were very conscious and deliberate in the registration model to say, look, this is free, but we ask folks to donate, and we disclose it's going to be $35 per racer for canoe rentals. It's going to be $5 per racer for our EMT. It's going to be $7 per racer for our city permits. It's also going to be $10 per racer, for our insurance. And so we're inviting folks to donate amounts equal to those line items in our budget, or the entire $72 projected total. And we've had about half of our racers pay more than that projected total, and half of our racers pay less than that projected total, which is exactly what we want. I obviously love seeing a donation that comes in at $100. I am even more happy to see a donation that comes in at $15, because that presumably is someone otherwise would not have gotten to the starting line.
Exactly, right. And a very common conversation topic in adventure racing is that the bar that new entrants have to jump over is relatively high, right? Now, I do want to say for listener, full disclosure, I am registered for this race, right? I have no financial interest in the race, but immediately upon seeing it posted, I ended up buying a spot in the race. I hope to make it out there. But my spot, it could be a de facto donation, or I could actually come out and race in Pittsburgh. And I hope to make it out there and do that and encourage people to go with me. So full disclosure, I am a racer as well for this event.
And I think that if I can jump in, I think that disclosure is really relevant because that highlights one of the struggles that we are dealing with as first-time race directors in a business model like this. Like, are we going to see a greater number of no-shows because there isn't as much financial skin in the game? So what can we do in our pre-race communications to mitigate that risk as much as possible? Because our kayak renter provider, is going to charge us $35 per registrant, no matter whether or not that registrant shows up. So, that's one of the interesting challenges that we are dealing with.
Seth Godin is a very popular writer about marketing. A lot of folks listen to him and follow his daily newsletter. And he talks about the idea of value and scarcity, right? And when you charge it, when people have a sunk cost into something, they tend to do it. Yep. So if somebody gives you $20 to go race, and $20 is in today's day and age, I never undercount people's money, but $20 is $20. They say, something, for $20, I'm not going to go race that day. And so in reality, because they have not given you a large amount of money, it turns up their ability to skip the.
Absolutely. And that's why we're really trying to play into the emotion and the policy behind this race. We want to be vulnerable. We want to talk about the vulnerabilities and the uncertainties and the challenges that we're facing, to try and, I think, build the, whether it's empathy or just we're trying to get cheerleaders for us. Right. We want to succeed, and we want to inspire others to want us to succeed. And I think that if we are able to do that successfully, that's marketing. Right. What business isn't trying to, tap into something like that? But if we're able to do that successfully, then I think it's going to eliminate a lot of the risks that you're talking about and the risks that we talked about before, announcing this registration model. This wasn't a consensus on day one. We had the conversations of what's that minimum registration fee that we should, publish to strike the balance that you're talking about so that we don't get the no-shows. And at the end of the day, I think that, perhaps I was just the loudest in the room, and we all agreed that, look, if we lose money on this event, we're not trying to make money on this event. We're volunteering. This is our volunteering for 2026. And if we end up having to, pay that delta between what it costs and what we get in donations, we think that this is important enough, and we love the sport enough that we're happy to make up that difference.
And I don't want to go too deep, too early into the human nature behind this, but one model you might want to consider for the future as we're talking out loud about it. And I'm curious what the listeners will think too. So feel free to email Brian@ardarkzone.com, listeners, with your own ideas. In a different life, I worked in a school district, and very often we would run a student fan bus to a championship game. And what we learned very quickly was that if we said, here's a free seat on the bus, students just wouldn't show up because they had no sunk cost. So what we did is that we collected $10 per student, which we then returned to them when they got in their seat on the bus.
Interesting.
So to your point, one model you could consider down the road is to say, listen, the registration cost is $75 for the race, but if you race, we'll give you back 50 of it. Something to think about, because all of a sudden it's wait a minute, I could pay $75 to stay home, or I could pay $25 to go race.
Yeah. I would. I love it. I'd love handing someone a $50 bill once they cross the finish line.
Yeah, here you go. This is yours, right back at you. It's just a lot of ways to skin that cat as you talk about human nature and about racing. And I think that what's interesting is now we're getting a little meta here, and the Venn diagrams are connecting. Is that adventure racing as a sport attracts people who think three-dimensional, right? You have a map in your hand, you have multiple disciplines, you have all of that. And it sounds to me that you and your team have run some three-dimensional thinking into the standard race setup and the race model. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yeah, I think so. And especially doing so in an urban setting, trying to capture a population that hasn't done it before. And, I think that there are races in Michigan that have just nailed the secret sauce based upon, what I've seen over the years. And so I think that we're trying to tap into that a little bit, in terms of entry level participants. But what's been really wild to see is that, our 12-hour race, is getting a lot of regional support from oh my goodness, GMARA just signed up for our race. This is like a real thing.
Vermont, that's Green Mountain, right? That's a distance.
Yeah. And then, so we're seeing a lot of regional support there for our 12-hour race. And then just to see the registrations come in or start to come in as we start to really focus on our 6-hour race locally, it's been really cool to see. And, we've scheduled the race so that although it's a little bit more logistically difficult on the front end, but for both races to finish at approximately the same time, through the same part of the course. And, really culminating this day of hopefully introductions to Pittsburgh with our regional racers and introductions to the sport with our more local racers, with everyone, crossing that finish line, celebrating together is, obviously a moment that I'm sure every race director is really excited for.
So clearly you're throwing spotlights on different things, right? You're throwing spotlights on the pricing model to get people to do it. And you mentioned the fact that this is an urban race in the city of Pittsburgh, which is a great storied, famous city in American culture. And there's so much pride there in who Pittsburgh is. And of course, the Pitt is the biggest show on TV right now, right? So you're having great moment. You're having a moment here. Tell us a bit about why the appeal of Pittsburgh as opposed to going outside of the city where there's ample racing area in other parts of the state. Why Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think just lowering those barriers to access in every single possible way, allowing our local racers to wake up, albeit early in the morning, and, sleep in their bed and get to the race. Be in a territory that they are vaguely familiar with in different parts of the city. I'm sure that we'll take racers through streets that they've been on before, but we're also really excited to take racers through Pittsburgh's newest, city park, which is almost 800 acres. And to my knowledge, has never hosted a sanctioned event before. I've been out there and I've seen plenty of dirt bikes out in the woods, but this is going to be, I think, the first time the city's issued a permit. And we're going to be introducing and really we're going to be creating trail to a city park that's, pretty unused at this point. And that's really exciting to me, especially because I go back to my very first adventure race where I got way in over my head in 2012, did Untamed New England. And I'm pretty sure that Grant Killian.
Most common thing in the dark zone, by the way, is the way over my head first race. So welcome to that club. Say about that first race.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, I think what I was gonna say, Grant Killian, I think used us to create a mountain bike system up there in, I guess, central Maine. And so to kind of do the same here to our city park and, really maybe create some of the first trails through that park. I don't know. It's not lost on me how things are kind of becoming full circle.
Well, that's the legacy, right? There's the legacy. And by the way, every time Grant Killian's name gets said on the show, we're one step closer to bringing back Untamed New England. Because Grant, I know you're out there. I know you're listening. And let me know when you want to put that together. I like to joke when you say Grant Killian's name, an angel gets its wings. So it's good to hear him mentioned on the show. But the idea of legacy, the fact that you did that 14 years ago, that lived in your collective consciousness, and now you're bringing that into Pittsburgh is a pretty powerful idea, right? That there's this legacy down through generations.
Yeah, I mean, I use the motto for Untamed New England whenever I'm trying to recruit a racer to come with me for the first. I don't race for myself. I don't know if I've ever done an adventure race competitively. I don't think I've ever done an adventure race where my team didn't include someone doing it for the first time. So Grant's motto of more an adventure than a race is something that has really rung true to me personally in my life and in this sport as well. And part of that's for the fact that he broke down the barrier to access to the sport for me. I was interning in New Hampshire in 2011, watching the local news, living with my grandma and grandpa at the time. And I saw a feature spotlight on Untamed New England, having never been introduced to the sport of adventure racing before. That was my first exposure. And I think prior to Untamed New England 2012, a team dropped out at the last minute. And he posted on Facebook inviting someone to fill their spot. I emailed Grant and said, I've got no experience or money, but if you'll let me into this race with a couple buddies, I'm sure that we'll be entertaining. And he said yes. And with Breathe magazine, they allowed us, into this adventure racing community. And so I think that for the same way that with their support, I got into it is definitely also a driving factor. Like you said, all these years later, trying to do the same here in Pittsburgh.
And my experience is the same as everybody else is that there was an act of kindness that took place as an intro to the sport. And you meet these great people, and the next thing you know, here we are a decade later having the conversation, right? That's, I always tell my own children, the children that I worked with, I would always say, it's kind of easy in life. Just surround yourself with good people. Find the good people and go be around them. And lo and behold, good things will happen.
Yeah. And that through line takes me right through to, Endless Mountains 2025, where I walk away from the theme of that race just being like, with a little grit and gratitude, you can go a long way. And those were the emotions and the through line for that race that really got us to the finish line, because we had some low moments, over those 7 days.
Yeah. So now we're in your own little racing a little bit now. So you mentioned Untamed New England, and then 2012, and now we were 13 years later. You were Endless Mountains Adventure Race, grit, determination, a tough time. Tell us about your team's experience.
Yeah, well, what I think is really, really important is that in between all of that, we're talking like 7, 8, 9 years, where I didn't race at all. Life got busy, go from being kind of an underemployed recent graduate to being low man on the totem poles in different industries. And, eventually I got the opportunity to have a little bit more flexibility in my life. And it was, again, folks who were curious about the sport who got me to sign up. It wasn't, hey, let's go do this. It was like, yeah, I'll help you get into this thing. And so now over the last few years, gotten back into expedition adventure racing. But again, only with folks who've never done it before. My teammate and I, we only had a team of 2. It was her second ever adventure race. Convinced her to go do 7 days out at Vermont. Just an incredible athlete, and especially on the bike. But really first time racing through the night before. And if anyone who's done multi-day racing, that's tough. And there's only so many ways I can say, I promise on day 3, you're going to come through it, but in her experience, it's like, her body's like a gas tank, right. You run out of gas. Gas doesn't magically appear. You have to rest, you have to get nutrition. And so I just couldn't in that moment convince her otherwise. And so she had to live through day 2. She had to live through day 3 to really get over the hump. And she did, and it was awesome. And we full coursed it. But I mean, it was definitely tough. And, I think one of the other things that I carry with me from that race is, it's hard to race as a team of 2. If I'm in the dumps,
a lot of time together. It's a lot of time. There's 2 people.
And my teammates in the dumps, there's no one to get you out of the dumps. So what we ended up doing was taking my 15-year-old GoPro from Untamed New England, and every single time we were both in the dumps, we spoke to our GoPro as if it was our third teammate. That performative act, inevitably improved our moods every single time that we did it, to the point that, we caught Paul, one of the volunteers on the course at one point, and I just begged him to recharge literally our third teammate because it was a missing team member and that we didn't want to, keep racing without.
It's a unique strategy. Now, you've mentioned Pittsburgh urban race. You clearly want to put the city on display. You clearly want to have people come in and enjoy all that is offered there. You mentioned the new park system. Bringing a race into an urban area is rather complex because of all the interlaying levels of permitting. How has your permitting been? How is the logistical challenges go with working with all the city agencies? Permitting is far and away the most complex thing race directors have to do. So any advice or guidance you have goes a long way.
Yeah, totally. It's been a wonderful process. We were originally going to try and host this race in 2025 and just couldn't get our ducks in a row. So we pushed it pretty early on into 2026. So I think we went through half of the permitting process with the city of Pittsburgh in 2025, kind of educated them on what it is that we were actually trying to do, and then worked with them through the end of 25 and the beginning of 2026 to get all of the approvals. And, folks have just been, so easy to work with, and expressing gratitude to them. CCing someone's bosses and saying, this individual's made this process so easy. Oh my gosh, the response times, went from, 24 hours to 24 seconds.
Right.
And now that we've got those relationships with the city, it's been an awesome process. So much so that, we had racers reach out to us traveling from the East Coast saying, hey, where can we camp? And that can be a little bit difficult. Our nearest overnight campgrounds to the city, are still 45 minutes away. And with a 5 a.m. map distribution, that's not going to be fun for anyone. So I emailed my contact at the city and I said, hey, are we allowed to request overnight camping in the city park right next to our start line? And again, within 12 hours, we got permission to do so. And I'm not aware of anyone ever getting permission to do overnight camping in this park before. So we've been identifying challenges, identifying problems, and the city of Pittsburgh has just been wonderful to work with to try and find solutions.
Yeah, there's an old adage that says that change happens at the speed of relationships. When you get to know somebody and you build those relationships, and we had another guest on recently who had to navigate a relatively complex permitting explanation with a local body. And what they did was they actually shifted the distance of their race to accommodate the permitting authority, hedging their bet that if they go back there in a year and say, hey, we want to do this again, there'll be greater flexibility because you've built that relationship. What did you find you had to explain the most?
I think that they're used to 5Ks. And right. So part of the permitting process is like, give me the course. Like, where is the course?
Well, yeah, here's a map. Thanks for it.
Yeah. And so, to be able to explain, well, this is the route I would take, and so a combination of that and a combination of like openness that, okay, we understand you don't want anyone over here. This is how we can clearly mark a map and explain to participants that they aren't going. One interesting thing that we didn't issue spot was, we're going to be going on Pittsburgh rivers. We had no reason to know that there was a separate permitting process through the Fish and Game Commission. And I guess that's just our, being first-time race directors. But fortunately, because we had these really productive conversations with the city, they have become stakeholders in this as well, right, and are spotting some of those issues that we're just, blinded to.
Yeah. I also think too, as someone who's worked in public policy and I've worked in various bodies over the years, I'm very optimistic about the current state of citizen government relations when it comes to local. I can't speak to the federal. We'll leave that over there for another podcast. But at the local level, it appears that I'm hearing more and more people who work on the government side who realize they have a resource and they want to responsibly share that resource with as many citizens as possible. I think that's been your experience in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and especially again, when I'm able to email them, this is a pay what you want event. Like, they know what that means in the subject line of my email. And so that's just really, I think, again, contributed to everyone becoming a stakeholder in the success of this event.
And you're opening up access.
Yep, exactly. And I'm opening up access to the city of Pittsburgh, a city that right now, I'm sure every city wants to showcase itself to the world. But, as you said at the beginning of, our discussion, like, Pittsburgh's kind of having like a little moment right now, and there's a lot of eyeballs on it, whether it's the upcoming NFL draft, whether it's the Pitt, one of the hottest television shows on TV right now. So we've got a lot of buy-in when I'm able to approach the city and say, I've already got people registered from Arkansas, Denver, Vermont, New York, Maryland, Ohio, who've committed to traveling here. I want to showcase the best that we have. And that really kind of like leads me into where our focus has been over the last, couple weeks is we have a route. And so now we're really focused on trying to partner with, places along the route or could be along the route to really feature the city. Here's a really cool, museum. Here's a really cool viewpoint of the city. Here's a really cool bike shop that we want to locate halfway through the route so that our racers know that there's, some assistance on the horizon if they need it. So it's been really cool to like take our route and figure out how to really make it shine. And it's also cool to be at that point in the planning process because that's, a little bit less stressful than the how do we connect the dots? How do we get the insurance? How do we get the permits?
I'm gonna throw my little bit of Pittsburgh knowledge out here, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. Primanti Brothers. Am I right about? Is that a Pittsburgh landmark institution? Tell us a bit about that place.
Yeah, so Primanti's is a sandwich place known for it's French fries on salads, it's French fries on sandwiches, it's French fries on everything that comes out of the kitchen. It holds a special place in my heart because I was touring graduate schools at the time, and I got to Pittsburgh a little bit early. Went in, had a Blue Moon in my first Primanti sandwich, and I wrote my seat deposit check, 2 hours later. So it's a Pittsburgh icon that I think has played a role in a lot of the lives of Pittsburghers here, one way or the other.
I'm glad that that's alive and well. That's part of your collective consciousness. And if on the course or not, that's your decision. That's a race director decision. But if you're out there doing the race, you have to stop there for a sandwich. It's an institution in a great city, in a great part of the world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is really just an opportunity to introduce hopefully 100 participants to our favorite parts of where we live. And I know that that's something that can be a challenge. I think that may have been a challenge for the race directors of, Endless Mountains 2025. There's so much you want to show off about the places that you live. That we've struggled to determine the distance of our course. Right. Brent was kind enough, and you can provide context to all of Brent's job duties and responsibilities. But Brent was kind enough to hop on a Zoom with me and my fellow race directors to issue spots on things. But one of the questions is like, is this race too long? And he shared with us his personal experience that 9 out of 10 first-time race directors are going to plan a course that is too long.
That's what happens, right? So you need an outside force. And Brent, for those who are listening, Brent Friedland of Rootstock Racing is also the executive director of the United States Adventure Racing Association. And one thing that USARA has done is that they've leaned into providing support for new race directors when it comes to course review and all of those other logistical things.
Yeah. We reached out to Brent specifically because we have a very young participant who signed up with their family of 4, and which perfectly aligns with the goal that we're pushing for here. But we wanted to talk through that. What experience do you have accommodating very young families and making sure that they have a successful experience? And we spoke for probably an hour, maybe 90 minutes. And of course, that conversation went into other places. And the support that we've gotten from USARA is throughout the whole process, from insurance to course design to these more, individual inquiries has just been awesome.
I think to that point too, I think with the loose confederation of race directors and how things operate is that very often the people who play nice with others, who support each other, who believe in each other, who carry each other, helps the entire sport. Right. And it's race directors very rarely, it happens, are in direct competition for the same sense of market share or same region. It comes up, it's the nature of the beast. But the race director, the race organization, the volunteer, the person in the sport that acts as an individual only for themselves, they get spit out the back of the engine because the whole sport is based on interdependence, which is wild because the team itself during a race is interdependent. And so the cellular team in a race, that idea then manifests itself at the larger level with them putting on races. So I think it's a very cool, once again, 3-dimensional way of looking at how the sport operates.
Totally. And, to that point, it broke our hearts. I spent a lot of my time in Fayetteville, West Virginia. And unfortunately, on the very same day, May 16th, 2026, there's going to be an awesome adventure race, the New River Rush, based in Fayetteville, West Virginia. I can't imagine a closer adventure race to Pittsburgh than that one. And, to see, them announce their race on the same day that we've got our permit for our race, and knowing that there's going to be potentially some overlap, it's really hard. So, I think that as we become more experienced race directors, as we develop these relationships, I've never spoken with the folks over there, at New River, but I certainly will going forward, once I meet them, to ensure that, we're not stepping on their toes and like that in the future, because, we really do want the whole community to thrive.
Where are you the explainer in chief? What really gets in the way for those racers?
We had one racer sign up this week when they found out that in my experience as a racer, I often feel that races are boasting about how long they are. And at least for the population that we are marketing to, that was prohibitive for some registrants. Right. So after meeting with Brent and redefining our distances, we had 2 or 3 people sign up within the first week.
6 hours felt too big, but the mileage felt reasonable. Right, correctly?
I think it was the mileage that felt too big for folks.
Got it.
So okay. they were okay being on foot for 6 hours. I think that they had concerns that they were the type of athlete who could cover 50 miles in 6 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it's very too, like, we lose perspective, right? As adventure racers, we talk about time and distance, unlike many other endurance sports and many other members. So right away you spook people when you begin to put those numbers. So by you making that adjustment and by explaining that differently, that increased your numbers.
Yeah. And I know that over the years, I've heard different rules of thumb. Like if you can complete a half marathon, you can do an adventure race of this distance. If you can do a marathon, you can do an adventure race of this distance. And I understand trying to equate an adventure race with the disciplines and the activities and the sports that these populations are already doing. But that's just I think just really difficult.
People want narrative. They want to understand things. And if I could do this, can I do this? And you want to attempt to do that. But it's not just adventure racing. In many places, because you could do this doesn't mean you can go and you could do that. Right. And so that's the challenge you run into. And it's a tough sport to explain in many ways. It's not the easiest thing in the world.
Totally. So I think that we've leaned in a little bit more into the hour, marketing the hours and the disciplines and leaning away from how far is that going to be? Yeah.
So this is an audio only podcast, as I mentioned, but behind you, as we are sitting, is this amazing display of gear and supplies. And it looks like you died and went to outdoor heaven. Where are you talking to me from?
Yeah. So I'm talking from I'm a lawyer by trade. I wish that this were my office. It is basically a family-run REI. Jason Miller is one of our adventure race teammates. He's one of the owners of this outdoor gear shop and supply store. But yeah, it's REI, except a huge emphasis on climbing and community. And so knowing their love and their support and the difference that they've played in the lives of everyone in this end of Pittsburgh. Another thing that we're trying to do is just spotlight their store. And
that's an independent small business.
Independent small business. Yep.
Right. So what we'll do for the listeners out there, we will put the link to, it's 3 Rivers Outdoor Company, correct? Am I saying it right?
Correct.
What we'll do is we'll have that link in the show notes, and we encourage our listeners, in the spirit of all of this, and once again, there's no affiliation between the Dark Zone and 3ROC. We're mostly sponsored freight. When you're looking for something to purchase, give them a look and see if you could help them out, right? Because you're supporting adventure racers in the community. So we will put that link in the show notes. You mentioned you were a lawyer, and in our conversation leading up to this podcast, you sent me an article. We're getting a bit away from adventure racing here, but I'm curious about this, where you were involved in litigation regarding a challenged athlete, a handicapped athlete, and access to sports. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So I am a civil rights and a class action lawyer here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I think it was about in 2022, a mom of a high school freshman reached out and said, much to her surprise, her wheelchair-using son was able to compete in Pennsylvania's track and field meets all throughout the regular season. But when they asked how he could qualify for, and if he qualified successfully, how he could participate at the state championship track meet, she was told that there's no opportunity to do so. We quickly found out that Alex wasn't alone. Alex has grown up with this disability his whole life. He plays sled hockey. For track and field, he threw the shot put and did the 200 meters. But we also had another client who didn't use a wheelchair, but also had physical disabilities. And so we ended up requesting the state of Pennsylvania for an accommodation on behalf of these different communities. We were met with resistance. So we ended up having to file a federal lawsuit here in the Western District of Pennsylvania. Again, not seeking participation trophies, not seeking automatic access to our state level playoff systems, but just standards that these kids could look to be motivated, to practice, to work harder, to try to attain in order to earn the right that all of their classmates had to compete at this state level, where the college coaches were, where the scholarship opportunities were, and for them were sometimes the only opportunities they had to compete against another kid who looked like them. And through that litigation, I guess what I'll say is the state of Pennsylvania has changed its policies, and there are now qualifying standards for boys and girls in high school with physical disabilities to qualify for their state championship and their track and field postseason.
So let me ask you this, because I worked in schools, Dark listeners know that, for a long time, and I have to ask this question. Clearly you prevailed, right? You know that, and the lawsuit was successful, and you got where you wanted to be, and that weren't. What was their standing on the state level? Why did they say they didn't have to do it? When you went back to the case law, and what was their bearing? Like, we don't have to do this because of this.
It is my understanding that the state was pretty fixated on providing individual accommodations to individual athletes. And I think one of the reasons why they were focused on providing individual accommodations was a perception that there was no demand for statewide participation from students with disabilities. And, unfortunately, that was I think the real source of contention for why the parties had a difficult time litigating that case is this fundamental disagreement as to whether this was needed or not.
Okay, so that's pretty thin logic, because no one's asking for it. We don't have to do it.
I graduated from the University of Michigan at a time where they were renovating the football stadium. And as a Michigan graduate, we take real pride in our football team and the size of our football stadium. And I remember being, 21, thinking, why are we reducing the size of our football stadium by 2,000 seats for, people in wheelchairs? I've never seen someone in a wheelchair at a football game. Why do we need to set aside 2,000 seats for them? And I go back 20 years later, and every single one of those seats has a, maize and blue wearing someone with a disability, their family members, their friends, because those individuals shouldn't have to sit alone. And, just trying to anecdotally speak about that experience throughout the course of this litigation, I thought was persuasive, but I don't think it was. I don't think it was for them. But it's if you build it, they will come.
Right. Well, exactly. You create the opening, you create the opportunity, and people will fill it. They shouldn't have to show up and ask for it. You should give it to them in advance.
Yep. Because, like I said, Alex and all of his teammates, they were playing sled hockey because sled hockey was a sport that they could participate in, and they couldn't participate in track and field. But now that they can participate in track and field, all of his classmates started signing up to throw shot. Right. And to do the 100 meters and the 200 meters. And now Alex is on a scholarship at the University of Alabama, just thriving as a sophomore.
Right. Roll Tide, doing as a graduate, class of 2021. So, right, exactly. Go Tide. Roll Tide.
That's awesome. I tried to get him to go to Michigan, but he said it was too cold.
Yeah. I have. Okay, go Michigan. Yeah, and I think there's a larger through line here in adventure racing, right? Because what we want to do is we want to create opportunities for as many people as possible to participate before they have to ask. And I'll just mention this real quickly, and my understanding is rather thin on this right now because I want to investigate it some more. Natalie Long has a race called Raid the Rockies. They announced this week that they have an adaptive team taking part in Raid the Rockies. If you create opportunities, people will show up to take part in those opportunities. They should not have to knock on the door. The door should be opened for them already.
Yep. And that's what Grant did for me. That's what on my local grassroots racing organization. Frank and Beth Ann did for me. That's what Doug did for me. And I don't feel indebted to anyone. I just feel like I also want to do that for others.
Yeah, it was done for you, therefore you do it for them. It's basic human decency, right? It shouldn't have to be, and it's not. And you owe nobody nothing, but it was done for you, so therefore you want to do that.
Yep.
So we've covered a lot, Kevin. Covered a lot of stuff here, a lot of good things going on here. I always like to wrap these things up by asking about your racing. What's on your schedule? I know you're in the blender of putting on Pay What You Want in 6 and 12 hours in Pittsburgh, and show notes will have that link. So sign up, everybody. But tell me about what's next for you. What are you looking at?
Yeah, I'm really excited because my co-race director, Griffin Haywood, he came to me and he said he wants to race competitively this year. He wants to be the slowest person on his team this year. And I think historically over the last few years, he's been a mentor and a captain of teams of other introductory racers. And so now we're going to, team up together and go out to Maine and do the Maine Summer Adventure Race, a race that I've done a couple times, but again, never with, a competitive mindset. And so we're not going out looking to win anything, but, we'd like to go out and make sure that we've left it all on the course, which is just going to be a different, mindset and psychology that I just haven't really done in a while.
And so to echo Grant, it's a bit more of a race than an adventure.
This one,
that's that one, you're going to go full gas.
We're going to try.
So on that note then, so knowing that you want to go full gas, knowing that you want to try and go as hard as you can, how have you adjusted your training?
Great question. I don't think, good or bad, don't tell Griffin. I don't think that I've adjusted my training. I'm a pretty good little runner. And so I'm just going through my typical, March, April training regimen. I do a lot of ultra running, and that really is going to be my focus for 2026. And, Griffin's motivated me to go do Maine Summer this year. But I've got a 100-miler in the fall. I've got a 100K in 3 weeks.
Which 100-miler?
Rim to River, again, down in Fayetteville, West Virginia. There's a great program down there where they do a 3-part series, a 50K in February, a 100K in April, and a 100-miler in October during the shoulder seasons of the rafting seasons to try and bring people to the community.
Right. It's an off-season event. Get people there. Okay, is that your first 100-miler? Or you done others?
It'll be my 4th 100-miler.
What are the ones that you done?
Canal Corridor, I've done twice in Ohio. It's in Akron, Ohio. It's a 100-mile race with about 600 feet of total elevation. So really, really fast race. And really, it's been a few years since that, and that was probably the last competitive race that I did. And then we went out and did Mountain Lakes 100 in Oregon this past year. Just an absolutely beautiful course. And lo and behold, guess what? The race directors on the West Coast are just as lovely as all the race directors I know out here on the East Coast.
Exactly. Amazing how that works.
Yeah.
The personality profile.
Yeah, seriously. Just an awesome course. So once a year, I've got a few buddies now who will all pick a destination trail race. In
That's a great way to do it.
The country we may never do again. So this year I'm making them all come to my backyard in West Virginia. And I don't want to run us long, and I don't want to just start swapping just race stories. But I if you don't mind giving me a little patience, I'd love to tell you my favorite race story.
We are not running long. The listeners love to talk. Go for it.
Okay. So I'm sure, like many listeners might relate to, every single time my wife and I go on vacation, I'm going to do a quick Google search to see, are there any races happening? And
you're hiding your browser history. He comes in the room, you turn the phone upside down. What are you hiding from me?
and there's never a race. But my wife and I, we don't do a lot of travel, but she was in between jobs and we wanted to do, potentially trip of a lifetime a number of years ago, maybe about 2021. And we were going to Slovenia, to Lake Bled in Slovenia.
Beautiful country.
To get we flew into Vienna, and spent some time in Austria. And I searched Austria, ultramarathon. And Google Translate, a result pops up, and Google Translate didn't do a good job. But we sign up for this race. I've got to go to the bank to wire the money, something I've never done before. I've got to email someone. They put me in touch with someone who can speak English. We show up at the night before registration, walk up to the table. They clearly realize that I'm English. and they call over the guy. This guy comes up, Mr. Tucker, Miss Heilman, welcome. Takes us over to the pre-race dinner. And that's when we realize that we are the first Americans to ever register for the Austrian Mountain Marathoning National Championship. Everyone is just looking at us like, who the heck are these two? And once they
put flowers on you, they're singing for you. The kids are dancing around you.
Once they realize that we're on vacation, on holiday, like, then everyone comes over, is like, welcome. It was just awesome. And what our experience was, we took more pictures than everyone, finished toward the back of the pack, just having a great time. But the aid stations were just very matter of fact. You'd get to an aid station, it was like, okay, now go.
Yeah.
Until the
no hanging out.
Just the very last aid station, we finally get to an aid station that was more our vibe. And these guys are just jamming out on an 80s boombox. And as we're leaving the aid station, we all of a sudden just hear, country road, take me home. And just the entire experience from start to finish. And again, like the race directors on the West Coast, like, you know, these volunteers in Austria, I mean, just the absolute best population and best community. I'm so happy to be a part of it.
I love that. I love the fact that you tripped and stumbled your way into this amazing experience, which is the way to live, right? The way to live is, and there's that dynamic that we have where we just sort of, we'll figure it out down the road. Don't plan too much, just sign up and have a good time. And I love the fact, I could imagine like you're famous, right? Here he comes, the American's here. Yep. You're like, Jesus, I better start running quick. I better get moving here. So it sounds like you clearly have internalized a lot of your personal, your professional, and your racing experiences into this whole package that you offer here. And so just before we wrap up here, I want to give you one last time, folks who are listening, make the case for the pay what you want. Why should they come do it?
Yeah, 3ROC's Pay What You Want 6-hour and 12-hour adventure race. You know, we're at every conceivable point in putting on a race. We're trying to break down barriers. You know, so come support us. It's going to be a great race. I don't want you to think that just because it's cheap, it's going to be put on cheaply. We're trying to give an A+ product for everyone possible. You know, making it possible financially. We're donating bikes. We're letting people borrow our bikes. We're opening up our community gear closet for folks who don't have gear. So come out here for a great race. We've got 40 spots left. We've got 60 of 100 spots filled. It's going to be a great day.
All right, folks, episode 154 of the Dark Zone. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Kevin for coming on and for going over his race and talking to us all about it. Great stuff. We are excited for his race, excited for his innovative model, and to see how everyone turns out in Pittsburgh this coming May. So thanks for being here, folks. Thanks for listening. Dark Zone loves you. We hope that you love the Dark Zone. Visit your platform of choice and like, click, and subscribe. The algorithm likes that. Can't wait to see you at a race. And until then, remember, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.